I'm turning my camera. Keeping my
No
camera
problem.
off.
No problem, Harry. Great to have you here. So I've already started the recording of this meeting so that we can share it in the future as well. So anybody who hasn't made it here yet might be able to see the recording afterwards. So just to give an outline of the evening while we're waiting for a few more to join us. So hello, welcome. Oh, that's another one popped in. So this is the 5th Writing the Earth event I've organised for Earth Day, creative responses to the environmental crisis. We've had some fantastic speakers over the last few years, and I'm really looking forward to the speakers we have this evening. The evening is in 3/3, so we have Helen's keynote talk to begin with, and then we have Harry Whitehead talking about his fantastic new novel, White Road, and then we have you, hopefully. We have an open mic in the third, what I call the Earth Bards showcase. I know some of you have signed up for that already, but if you do have a poem, a short piece of prose, like a flash fiction, even a song, whatever your party piece is, as long as it has a green theme, you'd be more than welcome to share it, but just let me know. If you have any questions for Helen, pop them in the chat, or raise your hand at the end. We'll hopefully try to fit in as many of those as possible. And if we don't fit them all in, then please email Helen afterwards. She'll share her email at some point, and you can keep in touch that way with her to keep the conversation going. But I'm now going to introduce Helen herself. Dr. Helen Moore is a pioneering British eco-poet, socially engaged artist and writer based in the southwest of England. It said here Dorset on your profile, Helen, so I'll just tweet that bit, but I will post the whole of the bio, which is very, very impressive, in the chat, because I want to give over as much time as possible to Helen herself, because she's got a fantastic talk lined up for us. So please give a warm welcome to Dr. Helen Moore.
Mm-hmm. Thank you so much, Kevan, and to everybody. I'm so delighted to be here with you this evening. And yes, I'm now based in Bristol, so I've moved since you got my bio. So yeah, I'm going to be talking about the Ecopoetikon, which is an online showcase of global eco-poetries, and the title of my lecture is Global Eco-Poetries as Transition Towards Regenerative Cultures. So yeah, I'm part-time staff at Arts University Bournemouth. I'm also a research associate at University of Gloucestershire. And this project is funded by UOG. And so just going to give a tiny bit about my practice, but mainly the talk is going to be about the Ecopoetikon. So yeah, for more than 20 years, I've developed a creative practice as an eco-poet. In the early years of the new millennium, my growing awareness of the unfolding environmental crisis fueled my desire to take different forms of action, which included deepening my nature connection, challenging societal values and cultural narratives through my creative work. And this is a slide that just gives you a tiny taste of some of my most recent work. The River Run project, which was done in collaboration, well, as a commission with Cape Farewell, who are based in Dorset. And I was working with scientists in the field looking at river pollution and the impacts of global warming on rivers, particularly on salmon species, but other riverine species. And so my work was exhibited in various galleries. So there's a couple of installations there, a sort of text on window of a gallery, and a floor-based installation with a milk churn. And then River Run was published in October of last year. So, okay, So it was in 2022 that I was invited to get involved with the Ecopoetikon project. And I was invited to come on board at quite an early stage, working with a web developer, a student based at the University of Gloucestershire. And the sort of team lead was Professor Aaron Stibbe, Professor of Ecolinguistics. And so this is the homepage of the online showcase, the Ecopoetikon. And so basically you have 3 search functions for the eco poems. There's a wonderful interactive map that you can kind of scroll around the globe looking for poets from different countries. You can explore eco poems by theme, and you can search if you know the name of an eco poet. And this gives you just a little taste of some of the themes that are on the site and some of the eco poets. And we're going to be meeting some of these eco poets in more detail, looking at examples of their work as we go along. The seed of the idea for the project, I wanted to just touch into, and it came from, there was a student, Catherine Alderman, doing an MA in ecopoetry at the University of Gloucestershire. And in writing her dissertation, she approached me, and she approached Professor Craig Santos Perez, who's an eco-poet, an Indigenous man originally from the Pacific island of Guam. He's based in Hawaii these days. And Catherine was interviewing us about eco-poetry. And in discussion with Craig, she was asking him, what could we do, particularly, poets in the global north. And he was saying that he felt that it was really important for poets in the global north to read and share and teach the work of poets from the global south. And so this was where the seed of the project began. And I want to just spend a few moments talking about this idea of global north, global south, because it is a contentious, contested term. We have a map here which shows the sort of distribution of global north, global south countries. So the blue represents the global north, the red, the global south. But of course, Australia, which is very much geographically in the south, is blue. So the north and south don't always correlate. And I think one of the things that is really important to talk about with this very problematic binary is not just the geography, but really this whole notion of assessing a country's status on the basis of its economic wealth. Clearly, there are more important metrics to show how much people and ecosystems are thriving. But these terms do have currency politically, and whilst they exist, they can help people to think beyond certain horizons. This is especially important when we consider that the industrialized countries of the global north share the most responsibility for the climate and ecological crises. And as individuals, our carbon footprints are on average far larger than those of people in the so-called global south. And yet there are many countries in the global south that are being hardest hit by the impacts of the climate and ecological crises. Sea level rises threatening the futures of Pacific Islanders, deadly heat waves threatening the habitability of certain regions, and of course the ongoing neo-colonial extractivism by the global north in the global south, and mining of rare earth metals with child labour, deforestation for cattle rearing, agribusiness of all types, sweatshops for fast fashion on our high streets, the list goes on and on. And ultimately, although we can make choices as ethical consumers, the problems are systemic and are derived from an economic system that puts economic growth and profit above all else. Beyond that, the language we use and the narratives we hold about our world often reinforce exploitation, but can also reshape perspectives towards sustainability and eco-social justice, towards regenerative futures. And this is what I'm going to be talking about more today. And this is why poetry is important. And we need to hear the voices of poets from the Global South who are confronting ecological and social issues in their everyday lives. It's also why it's important for poets to build networks of solidarity, for there to be communities who know the power of language to shift perceptions and contribute to the systemic change we so urgently need. So a little bit more about representation. So Ecopoetikon aims to offer equal voice and representation to established eco-poets from around the world. We have poets from every inhabited continent of the earth. There's a little list of some of the countries who are represented. So it's a really exciting project to have all these countries on board. And it's a growing tapestry all the time. So decolonizing canon and curriculum, who should have the power to determine which poems are worth reading? So we do aim to avoid exclusivity by including poets nominated by others on the basis that they demonstrate commitment and creative innovation in their practice. We're also aware that some poets may not define themselves as eco-poets, particularly when an ecological worldview is inherent in their culture, evident in their traditional ecological knowledge. So, you know, often an Indigenous person wouldn't necessarily need to define themselves in that way. Why is my slide stuck? Okay, so the next slide shows you a page on the website. So each featured poet has their own page. This is Rina Garcia Chua from the Philippines. Each poet has 3 poems that are selected by the editors and curated. Each poet obviously has a bio, links to any external websites, etc. And we also invite the poets to write a statement about the ecological and social crises within their region or country. So people have been very generous with their time and have often written very moving statements about the context in which they live and some of the impacts that they are experiencing. So I would really obviously encourage you to spend time exploring the website and having a read of some of these statements. So what is eco-poetry? Again, it's a contested term, but for Ecopoetikon, we choose to define eco-poetry as poetry written with engaged ecological and social consciousness. For us, eco-poetry is informed by a level of eco-literacy and awareness that we live within ecosystems and in reciprocal interaction with the more than human world. And that lovely beetle, I just want to mention, is one of the original illustrations that were made by Tom Graham for the website. We see the intertwining social and ecological crises, we might call it the poly crisis, some people say the meta crisis, as having the same roots, i.e. globalized, industrial, white supremacist, patriarchal capitalism and materialism. And beyond that, we see it as a crisis of perception and imagination. And of course, this is again why it's very important for writers and poets to get on board. And I'll be going into this in more detail as we go along. We also understand that the roots of the problem stem from a cultural separation of the human from nature and nature from culture. And just to kind of highlight, because this is something that's so kind of ingrained in how we operate in Western cultures. A friend of mine who's an activist in the Amazon works a lot with indigenous peoples, and she was telling me that in Ecuador, where she works, she was talking to local indigenous people and asking them if there is a word for nature in their language, and there isn't, and they were just kind of stumped to even kind of quite understand the concept that nature is something separate from themselves. So of course this word nature is problematic in that it kind of others and separates us when we're deeply interconnected with our ecosystems, and we are human animals. Humanimals is a term I like using, and part of this worldview stems from the French philosopher, the Enlightenment philosopher René Descartes, and this is an illustration that he made of the sort of separation between mind and body. So with the Ecopoetikon project, we are really seeking to feature poetry which witnesses social issues alongside the climate and wider ecological crises. So often these things are siloed, but they are, of course, interconnected. And poems that inspire readers towards holistic restoration of human and more than human cultures. So I'm just going to show you very briefly before we go into more depth with some of the poems. So this is, again, Rina Garcia Chua's poem, which Submerged Reefs, which has been themed around extractivism, industrial capitalism and oceans, because it kind of touches into all those themes. And this is an Estonian poet, Kristina Ehin. So of course, you know, some of the poems are in translation when they're not originally written in English. So we have to collaborate with translators. And so this poem is a very personal experience of drought. And so it's themed around unnatural disasters, climate emergency. So, as I'm sure is already clear, we have quite a strong activist intention with the Ecopoetikon. Our aim is to encourage people to embrace an ecocentric identity where we live from the awareness that Earth is our wider body and that more than human species are our kith, kin, community with whom we can co-create responses to the crises we collectively face. And Ecopoetikon poems often do reveal an extended sense of self and ecocentric identity and use eco-narratives and emotions to inspire change. So those three areas, extended sense of self, eco-narratives and emotions, are what I'm going to kind of focus in on shortly. So a couple of other examples. So this is a poem by Esther Vincent Zhu Ming, who's from Singapore. And this is a poem where she's speaking very directly to a plant, to a fern. And this is a poem that, you know, reflects a theme of nature connection, but also interspecies communication. And a poem by Craig Santos Perez, Chanting the Waters, which was written and performed as part of the Standing Rock Sioux Tribe protests, and it was written for them and for water protectors around the world. It's a very powerful poem, so very much in the theme of justice and resistance. Okay, so we're going to start exploring more deeply this whole notion of an ecological self as part of this idea of a transition towards regenerative cultures. So developing an ecological sense of self may be a project for poets who've been conditioned to think of themselves as separate from nature, like myself, growing up in a Western culture. And this often evolves alongside a more general decolonizing process. So examining historic and ongoing legacies of colonialism and the racist attitudes it's perpetrated, obviously developing an intersectional awareness, and releasing colonial and extractivist attitudes, not just towards our ecology, but also towards ourselves. That's a very important aspect, I think. And I could talk more about that, but I don't have too much time. So that could be a question if you are intrigued to know more. So the extended self, this notion of an ecocentric identity or extended self, so where we do really live with that awareness that we are human animals deeply interconnected with our planetary ecosystems. And this is a both ecological and cultural self, i.e. eco-cultural. And I'm referencing a book here by Milstein and Castro Sotomayor. There'll be references at the end if you're curious to know more about that. I was very excited when I came across the idea of eco-cultural identity, or ecocentric identity, and you might be too. So let's have a look now at some of the poems in more detail. So here we have Tanuri Ojede, who's from Nigeria. He's a very well-known poet in Nigeria. And his poem, My Story, begins with these lines: "Don't wonder why I have been inseparable from the land. Grandma buried my umbilical cord into the earth." And yeah, I think that speaks so powerfully already of this sense of deep interconnection. I'd really recommend reading that poem in more depth. It's quite powerful and a little bit edgy as well for some cultural sensibilities. Again, Christina Ehin from Estonia. Here, Ehin expresses a desire to be a wolf. My limbs metamorphose, fur grows on my beautiful body. I wanted to live with them, howl at the moon and suckle cubs. And then later in the same poem, she says, they won't have me as one of their own, for my gnarled human nature still shows in my eyes. And Kijiro Suga from Japan, in a poem, the Japanese Kokoro, heart, he's translated it himself. He says, life doesn't belong to you. Life on earth is one. You are but a tiny little piece of it. Salmon, fox, beech, kelp. We all make one life. So I want to talk now a little bit about eco-narratives, and I'm drawing on the work of Professor Aaron Stibbe at the University of Gloucestershire, who's written quite extensively about eco-narratives. And he defines them as narratives that involve not only humans, but also other species and the physical environment in interaction with each other. And as part of eco-narratives, he talks about eco-narrative structure. And I think this is quite an interesting concept for writers in general. He talks about 5 stages of eco-narrative structure: equilibrium, degeneration, recognition, improvement, and restoration. So it's fairly rare with Ecopoetikon poems that all stages are represented. Often the poems will illustrate 1 stage or perhaps two or 3 stages. So let's just have a little look at some of them. So again, this is Tanuri Ojede's poem, My Story. A little bit later in the poem, he's really evoking the beauty and abundance of his childhood, what we might call the equilibrium. I relished wild apples falling from ripeness into the forest loom. I hopped creeks to gather grapes, breadfruit, mushrooms, and waterleaf. Lemon and bitter leaves, spiced soups for the appetite. But then in the poem, later on in the poem, The discovery of oil destroys the social and ecological equilibrium. Jobs like dog's tears, streets awash with beggars and prostitutes, nothing holds the desperate folks from taboos. I crave to be filled and live in peace, but the new normal offers genetically modified crops because the land has been poisoned. It's a very powerful testimony. OJD was originally from the Ogoni land, which was really impacted by shell oil drilling for oil. Let's look now at a little journey within a single poem. So we're going to look at a piece by Massimo d'Arcangelo from Italy, from the Tuscany region. And it's a journey that moves from equilibrium to degeneration to restoration. And in this poem, Mersey, which is the name of a Tuscan river, d'Arcangelo evokes the familiar sound of the water for local inhabitants who are humans and non-human animals. Those who live in the place hear the river from indoors, how it permeates the silence of the abandoned ruins. The dull dive of a roe deer's hoof punctuates the ceaseless cycle of water flowing. So we have very much a sense of the equilibrium of the river, of the riverscape, and this sense perhaps also of the primeval water cycle, the ceaseless cycle. And then the poem continues to recall an earlier pollution event when chemicals were spilled from a mine into the Mersey, and that the picture there on the right hand side of the screen is of the Mersey. I've visited there myself. It's a very, very beautiful place. Once that river was poisoned, iron, arsenic, cadmium spilled from a mine. I wasn't there, but those who lived through that time say no people or animals travelled those reddish, stinking waters. And of course, the direct speech there in the poem just gives a real sense of testimony and really adds to the immediacy of it. This was a poem that I translated in collaboration with Massimo, and yeah, it's quite a challenge to of course render the original into something that you know, communicates to people. So finally, the poem, this is the conclusion of the poem. The poem expresses the restoration that's occurred of the ecosystem. But the river was given a second chance, where all was dead, deformed, disowned. Breath was restored to otter and newt. Now that river is animated. Children and dogs swim in clear waters, watch the fish returning upriver to the source. And I love that sense of the kind of cycle of restoration, returning to equilibrium, and with the fish returning upriver to the source, probably to spawn. And yeah, it just kind of feels a really beautiful way for the poem to end. So some of the poems are very much witnessing the impacts, the degeneration, and this poem by Vinita Agrawal from India, The Central Asian Flyway and the Apricot Farmer of Ladakh, focuses on a farmer's deepening recognition of the impacts of the climate crisis. A blood and bones farmer surveys open-mouthed this year's mound of apricot crop, rotten and decayed, devoured by aphids and mealybugs. And by showing why this has occurred, Agrawal allows the reader to gain greater insight into the ripple effect degeneration of the ecological crisis. Thrushes and plovers, stints and wheatears, they haven't flown in this season. Insects have flourished. Spring migration has succumbed to rising temperatures. So, of course, the ultimate degeneration, the terminal degeneration is extinction. And Susan Richardson, a British eco-poet, has made a very creative way of trying to convey the pathos, the emotion of extinction. And here she plays with the concept of a transcript of the final words of the last member of a now extinct fish species. It is the European sturgeon, but in the poem, the fish is called plibble. And so we have the language, the sounds that the fish makes, or shish, swoosh, swoosha, swoosha, or shish. I won't continue with it because I haven't practiced it terribly much, but the English translation is silent sea, weary, weary sea. I swim and seek, seek and swim, but the sea is filled with myself alone. And here we have Helena Hukum Singh, who's of Mauritian heritage. She's lived partly in Mauritius, but also is based in the UK. And here she uses a Mauritian Creole word, which means in the woods, dans bois. Those of you who know any French will perhaps pick up dans les bois. Dans bois is like a corruption of the French. Of course, the French colonized Mauritius. And Hukum Singh uses the Mauritian Creole very powerfully in the poem. And the poem ends really with a call to action to restore equilibrium. We pray for wholeness and to heal Earth's pain. We walk in balance and harmony to grow new life and see blessed change. Dans bois, dans bois, dans bois, dans bois, dans bois. And if you get a chance and you want to look up this poem on the website, this page to a beautiful video poem that she made of herself reciting the poem. Helena actually identifies as a Reiki witch, and there's very much a kind of incantatory quality to the poem, a real sense of kind of casting a spell through the language. And I love how we pray for wholeness, we walk in balance and harmony. It's just kind of like really saying this is what we're doing, this is how we're calling it in. Yeah, it's a very, very beautiful poem. And well, here's me, and I wanted to just share a little bit of a poem that's also on the website. And of course, with restoration, we can never have full restoration. We might have restoration of an ecosystem, but we can't have, full global restoration, not for maybe a very, very, very long time. So restoration is always partial. It's always going to involve adaptation. And in this poem, there's a speculative future where rising tides have drowned parts of the city. It's London, but nevertheless, people are slowly adapting. So this is the first part of the poem. The sun presses down with many hands. We are pig iron smelted in the furnace. Trafalgar Square bakes like Tahrir Square without its people. And we have slowly adapted, come out at night when it's cooler, stroll the canals fashioned by the uprisings of the Thames. And the poem continues, and there's aspects of the adaptation are illustrated. They include unifying across political borders, making Earth-centric decisions, and growing food in harmony with natural cycles. And there's no choice but to be in what's left of Europe. Mother Earth has moored humanity together at her table, and she's at the center of all our decisions. And so, of course, this personification of Mother Earth has perhaps more of an emotional effect than just talking about the planet. I sometimes, question whether the use of Mother Earth is necessarily what I want to communicate. I've been influenced by a wonderful activist and systems thinker, Joanna Macy, and she has a wonderful book called Earth as Lover, Earth as Self. And sometimes I wonder if, having a sense of the earth as our lover rather than our mother might be more powerful. But certainly a lot of indigenous peoples talk about Pachamama. They have a sense of Mother Earth. So yeah, it's an interesting one to explore. So we're coming towards the end of the presentation. I want to conclude by talking about emotions and eco-narratives, in relation to emotions. So eco-narratives can use logic and facts to describe the impacts of unsustainable systems and present practical ways to create change. But it's fairly clear that facts or solutions are often insufficient to really motivate change. So attaching emotions to knowledge is a way of inspiring people to take action. Sometimes those emotions are expressed very directly by the poets, and sometimes they're more implied. And this is a poem an extract of a poem by Zheng Xiaozhong from China. And Xiaozhong has actually worked in a Chinese factory, and she writes a little bit about that in her statement on the Ecopoetikon website. And this poem, Time, expresses grief at her life as a factory worker. In the midst of forgotten time, I see my youth wriggling away through clean, transparent grief, withering in the vastness of my country. It's a very, very moving poem. Again, I'd really encourage you to look it up and read all of it. All Zhao Jing's poems are just stunning. This is a term that perhaps some of you have encountered already, solastalgia. And this is a new term which has been coined by Glenn Albrecht. And he has defined solastalgia as the distress that is produced by environmental change impacting on people while they are directly connected to their home environment. And of course, we've already seen the work of the Nigerian poet Tanure Ojede talking in his poem My Story about the degradation of his local area, the abundance of his home life as a child, the ecosystem around him. And then the impact of the oil. And I think solastalgia, might be one way to describe the implied emotions of that poem. But the sort of melancholia that's perhaps, or kind of maybe climate anxiety is another way to talk about it. But that's only one way of people expressing their distress. Sometimes it can come through as anger, and sometimes obviously really being in touch with our anger about what's going on can be an important fuel for our creativity and really for creating change. And I do think that we live in a culture where we're routinely suppressing our anger quite a lot of the time. And this is a very powerful poem by John Kinsella from Australia. He's identified as a vegan and a vegan, anarchist, pacifist is how he identifies himself. And he's been writing eco-poetry for decades. He often actually goes and stands in front of bulldozers and recites his poems, you know, really on the front line of destruction. And this poem is one that expresses his anger at pesticide spraying from aeroplanes close to his home in the Australian wheat belt, which is in Western Australia. There's a strong wind blowing in our direction. The baby is out of the house, for which I am grateful, but it will come back to an invisible coating, a new layer to our occupation. They kill to make us grow, to feed the population. There's a chain of profit as perpetual and cyclical as a teething ring. Yelling into the tinctured air makes you hoarse. And I find that image of the chain of profit as perpetual and cyclical as a teething ring very powerful, particularly when it links back to the idea of a young child, a baby, you know, potentially being impacted by the spraying of pesticides. So, to conclude my presentation, I hope that I have succeeded in showing you the Ecopoetikon poems, how they illustrate examples of unsustainability, of ecocide, etc. But also that the eco poems creatively express new ways of living and being. They may also express a sense of the extended self, and they often incorporate different stages of eco-narrative to witness destruction and injustice and to inspire transformation. Emotions can contribute to inspiring action. And so with the Ecopoetikon, we see eco-poetry as a restorative act, a signpost towards regenerative cultures, uniting social and ecological justice, where people cooperate to adapt to our changing Earth and to restore the biodiversity of the bioregion that they inhabit. And this is my final sort of contribution this evening, is this vision of a wonderful permacultured city where the traffic is gone, the roads have been transformed into growing spaces. There's just food growing everywhere and wind turbines, and it's just such a delicious possibility of how we could transform if there's sufficient collective will. And so this is a kind of provocation, really, this idea of a future without eco-poetry. And I believe that collectively we can participate in co-creating a world for which future generations will thank us, a world where eco-poetry will simply be poetry again, because the eco will be a given. So thank you so much for listening. I hope that you have enjoyed my presentation. Just a reminder of the website link, ecopoetikon.org. That's a link to my website, helenmorepoet.com. There's a page with the references, the books that I've referenced in the talk, and of course the website. And yeah, thank you for listening. And if you do have any questions, I would be delighted to hear them. And I'm just going to stop sharing my screen.
First and foremost, thank you so much, Helen.
Thank you.
What a
thank you.
Rich talk with so much generous kind of information, advice and connections and fabulous poets to check out. But what really struck me was your great example of what I call a rhizomatic writer, which I talk about in my book, Writing Ecofiction, and which we will be exploring in an MA unit I've developed called Writing in the Anthropocene. You've created this network that you kind of wanted to be part of, and now you're situated amongst this amazing kind of like cohort of fantastic poets. Isn't that wonderful? Something that is reciprocal, mutually empowering, and yeah, it's a wonderful example of a rhizomatic writer in action. So I really appreciate that. What also struck me is that all of your poets are very situated in their identities, in their countries, but also there's this very strong transnational element to your project. You could almost call it poetry sans frontières. And I wonder whether, like, you know, the United Nations should be sending poets as diplomats, as agents of empathy and awareness into zones of conflict and disaster, you know, because we need that now more than ever in this world. You know, we need to heal relations with the more than human, with our ecos, with our home, but also with each other. What are your thoughts on that idea?
Well, I think that's a brilliant idea, Kevan. Yeah, I think that it would be an entirely different world, wouldn't it, if poets and writers were at the helm? You know, we've been declared the unacknowledged legislators.
Shelley said, yeah.
So maybe we should become the acknowledged legislators.
Yes, absolutely. So just one thought throughout there, but I really want to give over the floor to anybody who has a question for Helen. Please raise the hand, fire away, otherwise I can think of one. One from Mo. Go ahead.
Yeah, hi Helen. Thank you. That was really lovely.
Thank you.
Just a question for the Italian poem Merce, which I think you said you translated. Was the first section that you read out translated from Italian? Because the sibilant sounds worked so well. I was just curious about the language that was used. Did he write it in English or did you translate it?
No, I translated it. Yeah. Massimo wrote it, the original, in Italian, and yeah, I translated it. So, I'm really glad that it certainly that part and it works.
I'm just curious to know, was it easy to translate it in a way that would make it have the same effect?
Well, often you can't get the same effect. You know, that's the enormous challenge of translation. There's a phrase in Italian, the verbs to translate and to betray are very close sounding, and so there's a phrase in Italian which goes, to translate a text you have to betray a text, and I think there's an enormous truth in that. And I've also collaborated with Massimo, with him translating my work into Italian, and it's an extraordinary thing to do. I love it, particularly when you can sit down, you know, face to face, not online, face to face with the poet you're working with or the writer you're working with, and have just like these incredibly rich dialogues where you tease out, often in very broken English or Italian, you know, what the meanings are, and
you share the sounds almost.
Yeah, exactly.
Brilliant, thank you.
Thank you, that's a great question.
Any other questions for Helen? By the way. Oh, Anna Sophia, go ahead.
Hi, Anna Sophia. Great to see you again. Yeah, you may be muted.
Can't hear you yet. Anna Sophia, keep going, keep trying. Try now, it looks like you're unmuted. Maybe try again in a minute. Make sure you're using the right microphone, because you might have had another thing set up beforehand. You could always go out and come back in again. That sometimes works too. I know tech whiz, but one from Chloe. I hope that's how you say your name. Go ahead.
Sorry, not the right name. My name's Pauline. It's just showing a weird thing. But thank you so much for the presentation. It was really lovely. I was wondering, have you ever tried any projects where there would be some co-writing? I imagine different writers have different skills. They feel confident or not so confident. And as a disabled creator, it's a very mainstream thing to work together because of abilities or other considerations. And I'm wondering, is that something that you've considered? Obviously, translation is one, but I'm wondering if you've thought about doing that from, you know, A to Z, basically.
I mean, it's something I'd love to do. There's a wonderful ecopoetic collaboration with Claire Whistler and Kay Syrad. I don't know if you know of them. They call themselves Kind and Kind, Kin apostrophe D, Kind and Kind, and they're, you know, very much playing with the idea of kin and extending our sense of kin. So they often write together, they work together. And they've recently published a book, a little pamphlet called Waterdrop, and the poems are written in collaboration. I think that's amazing. I haven't done that. I've collaborated, especially as a socially engaged artist, you know, I've collaborated with other artists and musicians, which is, you know, a very rich thing to do, but I've never co-written, apart from, you know, in the translation sphere. So yeah, maybe one day. I love the idea of it. How about you? Have you done it?
I haven't, but I've done that a little bit with illustrations because I have limited arm ability. So it's something that I've started doing with other artists. Yeah.
Wonderful. Oh, I think it's a gorgeous idea. Thanks so much for your question.
Thank you.
Thank you. Shall we go back to Anna Sophia, see if her mic is working now?
Can you hear me now?
Yes, we can. Yay.
Thank you so much, Helen, for your presentation. It was fascinating as always. And you touched on the you mentioned colonialism around the self or of the self. Would you be able to expand on that? I'm quite interested.
Yes. So I'm glad you picked up on that. Yeah. Well, I think, you know, we are deeply colonized by capitalism, and, you know, so the extractivism that we see of the earth, you know, the ecosystems of the earth, whether it's through mining or quarrying or mountaintop removal, or these horrors, you know, but we are doing it to ourselves all the time. You know, the way that we're constantly extracting from ourselves, like pushing ourselves to go beyond in so many different ways. You know, I mean, I'm often guilty of just pushing, not taking enough rest, and, you know, getting out for nature connection. You know, sometimes work pressures just push me into sort of those kinds of extractivist habits. So I think that's, you know, one way. I mean, just the way that caffeine is just such a huge phenomenon in our culture, and drug use as well. You know, we're constantly trying to extract more from our bodies by, you know, taking these different stimulants to you know, succeed, push more beyond our sort of physical limitations. So I think that's definitely one way in which we could look at decolonizing the self. You know, and there's lots and lots of other ways, I think, in which it's apparent. Of course, the way that, you know, people are susceptible to, you know, capitalist imagery of, you know, what the sort of perfect body looks like, you know, etc. There's so many different ways in which, you know, people who are going under the knife or what have you, because their bodies don't fulfill some criterion of desirability or beauty, or all of that.
Thank you. That makes sense. Thank you so much.
Any final questions for Helen before we have to let her go? She's got another fantastic event lined up straight after this. I will say that Helen is one of our fantastic teaching team on the MA Creative Writing, and she is the unit leader on the Writer in the World, which is a fantastic unit. Many of you know her from that, but I don't think all of you do. So if you are interested in working with Helen Moore, then do look at our fantastic MA and get a chance to work with her and other fantastic writers too. So we're very lucky to have her on the course. She's brilliant, as you've seen this evening. Are you continuing with the Ecopoetikon project, Helen, or do you have something else lined up? Because I know you're very, very busy.
Yeah, no, it's one of the strands that I'm weaving at the moment. And in fact, yeah, the event that I'm going to shortly is an online Ecopoetikon event with some different poets from different countries reading, and yeah.
Fantastic. Well, make sure you have rest as well. I love the idea of decolonizing the self. I'm definitely guilty of colonizing myself, and I need to like pull out and stop being so tough on myself. So yeah, do make sure you get some quality downtime as well. Time in nature. I was just sitting in the garden before this and feeling the sun on my skin. It's so lovely out there at the moment. You know, it's so important to do this, especially when we are using a virtual kind of format like this. So thank you so much for your time. We'll let you go now.
Thank you,
So you catch your breath.
everybody. It's been a joy to join you. I'm sorry I have to dash, and I'm really sorry not to stay and hear Harry and hear the Eco Bards later.
Yes,
but
yes.
I wish you a wonderful evening.
Thank you so much, Helen. If you can let us know what email you want to share, then I will pop that in the chat for them. Okay.
Yeah, just my AUB one will be fine.
Okay.
That'd be brilliant.
All right. Take care.
Bye
Many
bye,
thanks.
everybody.
Bye.
Bye. Bye. Bye. Bye.
So let's have a 5-minute break now before we meet our next guest of the evening, Harry Whitehead. So let's come back, say 1 minute past 7 to give us 5 minutes. Okay. Okay, good people, so welcome back. That's 5 minutes. Hope you've been able to find some comfort. So, hey, Harry, nice to see you. So, let me introduce you properly. Full disclosure, Harry was my PhD supervisor.
Don't confess it. Too late.
Harry was my Gandalf, or Obi-Wan Kenobi, as my PhD supervisor at the University of Leicester. So there, it's out there. Sorry, Harry, but he's a novelist and a teacher at the University of Leicester, where he directs the annual free literature festival, Literary Leicester, which is fantastic. I highly recommend checking that out. He used to work in the film business, which is really interesting. Perhaps that has influenced his fiction. We could possibly talk about that. His debut novel, The Cannibal Spirit, published by Penguin Canada, was set among the first peoples of Canada at the turn of the 20th century and was reviewed as powerful, brave, ambitious, a thriller with a Joseph Conradian plot and a unique work, compelling, complex, thought-provoking, and impressive. It's a great read. Do check it out, The Cannibal Spirit. His second novel, White Road, a literary eco-thriller set in the high Arctic, is published in September this year by Claret Press and W.F. Howes. So we'll be mainly talking about that, but it's just great to see you here, Harry. How are you doing?
Yeah, really good. Thanks so much for having me along tonight. I must say that picture of me that you've got up there enormously on the screen makes me look a bit like I did all my research in the high Arctic personally.
I'll tell you. Sorry for that, but it's lovely to see you. Yeah, so I've got a few questions just to jumpstart my brain, if anything else. But if like anything else pops up, then I'll be happy to go off piste. But I've got a few, leaders, starters for 10, to see how we get on. So let me kind of try a few of those just to prime the pumps then. So, I mean, how would you define your writing? Is it eco-fiction, or would you say it's something else?
Well, certainly my agent and publisher have made a decision for me that it's an eco-thriller. But listening into Helen's really wonderful talk beforehand, I mean, what struck me is, I'm sure she would have been the first person to want to expound on this as well, is that, in part, writing environmental fiction, eco-fiction, eco-poetry, whatever, is about audiences as well, given that there's a certain kind of implied sense of being on topic, talking about topic. George Marshall, who founded Climate Outreach, he said that how do we go beyond the usual suspects? And we're all here, we're all interested, we're all already interested, and that there's a certain circularity to that. So I guess you primed me with this question, and I was thinking about it, thinking, well, yeah, I've always said it's cli-fi, it's environmental fiction, it's eco-fiction, it's any of those kind of things. But, maybe that's problematic. Maybe, maybe I should just be calling it a disaster story or a thriller, so that then, it's not defining itself, it's not delimiting its potential audience. I mean, not just for sales, but because we're talking about eco-poetics and so on tonight.
It was interesting what Helen said, that she wants ultimately to achieve a place where she can just call eco-poetry poetry again. And wouldn't that be great if that was the case with eco-fiction too? I mean, like, maybe we're creating our own back by using such tags like you're perhaps suggesting, but like, is a useful marketing tag, but it might put people off and it might limit what we can write about. Well, fiction should be sans frontiere as well, shouldn't it, really?
Well, it should. I mean, I'm not saying don't. I'm not making some big kind of point about it. It just interested me, and it made me think a little bit more about about how we define things, and how by defining things we imply audiences, and what we're trying to do when we're writing the environment. I mean, it's it's the big subject, right? I mean, there's some I can't remember the name of the group, some American group trying to push ecological and environmental issues into more films. Say that only in, around 3% is the environment even referenced in American cinema. So, they're just pushing for it to be a subject that is because it's the big subject, so that it's just, of course it inhabits dramas and narratives and poetry and so on, because it is, a civilizational existential subject at its broadest anyway.
Yeah, it's a more or less hyphen object. It's what Matt Bull calls the Anthropocene unconscious. It's there inflecting everything that has been created and consumed at the moment, whether we like it or not. I feel it is the only game in town, and the defining crisis of our age, as the UN say. So I think we have a moral responsibility to look at this stuff hard and use everything we have to do our best to help tackle it. So the next question then is this your first rodeo, or have you written other eco-fiction? Is the cannibal spirit an eco-fiction?
No, I don't think so. I don't think I could. I think that would be stretching it. I was wondering if I could make a punt on that, but no, I don't think it is. It's I mean it is, and I was obsessed with the landscape. It's all set in British Columbia, and the landscape played a massive part in the writing. And this book, is set in the high Arctic, so obviously landscape I'm interested in. I went to British Columbia researching the book, and I went for a walk with this really hard as nails 75-year-old woman, and we walked 12 hours all down the coastline and got hopelessly lost in the forest. And we got stuck by a headland, and we had to head inland, and we were really lost in this really dense forest. And we found this little trail and that you had to stoop to walk along through. We thought, great, humans. We walked all through this little path for about 10 minutes, and then we walked straight into a bear den. And I didn't know it was. I just thought, God, it stinks in here. And she said, oh my God, Harry, it's a bear den. Get us out of here. So we beat our way out and found ourselves back on the beach. Right. In some ways, that that stuck in my mind perhaps more than anything else, being lost in the temperate jungle. And it's so infused the whole book, as you know, Kevan, you read it.
Survival,
it's all about that, isn't it? That kind of oppressive, all powerful kind of jungle environment. And I guess in those terms, landscape has played its part in both books. But I haven't. This is my first go at a novel, an eco-fiction for sure.
So did you start with the issue first of all, or did you start with a character or a scene, an image?
It's
chicken and egg, really.
It's funny, it started when I said I want to write a book about the oil business.
Yes.
And my wife, who's also a novelist, rolled her eyes and said, I want to write a novel about the oil business. She said, well, it's got to be about the who. No, I want to write a book about the oil business. I was also really interested in the high Arctic, but I was fascinated with the oil business, and because as much as we have come to loathe it, it's the black blood in all our veins, and in our civilization sort of progress to this point we're at. So I was kind of obsessed with it, horrified by it, and obsessed with it. And then Deepwater Horizon happened. So I'm sure most of you know what that is. The huge oil rig explosion in the Gulf of Mexico. And I watched it in horror, as we all did. But, if you're a novelist, you're kind of, there's a bit of you going, wow, that's cool. In a kind of horrible way. Whoa, look at that. Wow.
Everything's researched.
So, I mean, it's visually and outrageously dramatic and terrible and all the rest. And then I thought, well, what if that happened in the Arctic? Because I know the drilling's going on in the Arctic. And so those things came together, the what if, and it ended up as a what if the Canadians gave up their moratorium on deep water drilling in the Arctic and allowed it to happen again, what might happen? Because you can't, if there's a blowout, if an oil rig blows up, there's a blowout on the seafloor and there's ice, you're stuffed. There's nothing you can do. You can't deal with the blowout. You just got to let it go, let it happen. Of course, there's drilling in the Arctic all over the world going on at the moment, but there's no known solution for how you deal with a disaster if there's ice. And that when I found that out, I had my story, right?
Yeah, so I remember when you were starting to work on this and you gave the talk at the British Library on how to blow up an oil rig when we were both kind of research scholars at the Eccles Centre in American Studies. And I mean, I was going to ask you about how you said about researching blowing up an oil rig, for instance, without kind of like raising alarm bells, you know, in, I don't know, MFI or whatever it is, you know, some kind of security bunker somewhere, some alert going off.
Yeah, it's not something you Google, is it? So you know, he had the guys in the black balaclavas come down from the helicopters and whisk you off. And actually, when I gave the talk, I titled it "How to Blow Up an Oil Rig." I gave this talk at the British Library, and all the usual suspects, liberal lefty bunch, came in to kind of listen to me being a liberal lefty giving the talk. But there was this one very sharply dressed in a blue suit, young, fit-looking guy who came strutting in and sat at the back with his notebook and stared meaningfully all the way through the talk at me, and then left immediately I finished. So it had obviously pinged somewhere, in actual fact. But it took me, I mean, it really did. I mean, it took years to learn about, I mean, yes, how to blow up an oil rig, but first you got to know how the oil business works, how an oil rig works, what kind of rigs would end up in the Arctic, can you take there, how do they function, how does I'm not going to bore you with it all now, but oh man, it went on and on and on. It was, I dropped right into a kind of well, into a very deep oil well. But it was, I mean, I've got to say, as a novelist, you've got to kind of be dispassionate to a degree, and it's the most incredible technology we've ever invented in the history of the world. I mean, there's no two ways about it. So it was pretty fascinating stuff as well. And then I got to blow one up which was even better.
In your imagination, let's add that caveat right here. Yeah, but the best special effects. So having done all of this research then, were you faced with a kind of conflict of interest that I think all novelists face between, didactics and aesthetics, between your research and between just telling a damn good story? Was there a risk that your whole novel, like a kind of top-heavy oil rig, would just like topple over at some point under this kind of huge amount of research and information?
Yeah.
How do you balance that?
I mean, it's a really important question, isn't it? When you're writing big subjects, big topics, and when you're writing about this subject of all, I mean, the problem is always being didactic, because most didactic novels are crap. Let's face it. A novel explores rather than preaches if it's going to be any good. I think, I mean, I'm sure we can always offer examples and the opposite, of course, but for the most part, you explore. So the message is implicit in the story rather than explicit. Yeah. So, and I'm really interested in ecotage and environmental terrorism, and Andreas Malm's book, How to Blow Up a Pipeline. If you haven't read it, read it. It's a really masterful kind of exploration of whether environmental activism should be peaceful or whether it should have a violent sabotage arm. And this was the other part that I was really interested in, was ecotage. So I set off with characters in mind who were kind of all environmentalists, and this immediately became problematic, what you're asking about now, the didactic and and so on. So I sort of found myself pulling away from that And just apropos of nothing, really, I was reading this story about one of the only female rescue swimmers ever to have become a professional rescue swimmer. You know, the people who jump out of Coast Guard helicopters and swim to boats to save people. And she was one of this American woman, Karen somebody, lost her name because we're here. And she had a terrible time of things. The misogyny she faced was just brutal and relentless. She had to be kind of better than the men, and it's an incredibly physical gig, you know, as you can imagine. So it was an amazing story, and it stuck with me. And so my protagonist, Carrie Esler, was born of this person, and she's essentially she's a Scottish-born ex-Royal Navy rescue swimmer, now working as a Coast Guard in Canada, and she's been sent up to the polar north, partly because she split up with her kind of poster boy Canadian Coast Guard helicopter pilot in suspicious circumstances, so shall we say. So she feels she's been sent to purgatory, and she doesn't really give a shit about environmental issues. You know, she's cynical about everything. She's cynical about where she is. She doesn't see the beauty in the Arctic. She's just kind of, she's not a believer in much. And that gives you, if you like, sorry, I'm waffling a bit maybe, but this, what that gives you as a writer, the opportunity to travel, if you like. If you start, you know, you start with your environmentalist, what are you going to do? How are you going to change them? I mean, yeah, maybe they fall in love and out of love and learn about love or something like that, sure, but how do you do the big stuff? So I'm not sure she turns, I mean, I don't want to give the plot away, but I'm not sure she completely becomes full polar bear hugger.
One of the things that really stands out in your great novel are these characters, and I don't think you have anyone who's a real dyed-in-the-wool eco-lefty. They're all like complicit, they're all compromised, they're all quite cynical, they're all part of this whole petronormative paradigm.
I like that. That's nice.
Yeah, you can have that one free. And they're not really like necessarily trying to critique it. I mean, there's a discourse, critical discourse within the novel. It's very well dramatized. All the issues are kind of flagged up, really, but you don't have somebody as a tub thumping lefty. You do have like the guy in the boat, obviously, but you know, he's not very animate, let's put it that way. But that's one of the things that really stood out for me, is that you didn't go down that kind of eco-lefty route where you just tried to make us sympathize with these kind of eco-lefties. You kind of went the other way. You went to the dark side.
Well, I did, and that, you know, the other protagonist is the corporate oil business boss of the rig that blows up. And the reasons why it blows up, there's all kinds of stuff, you know, there are a number of different reasons why this blowout happens, and this, the biggest environmental disaster in history, unfolds through the novel. And my second protagonist is a, you know, highly complicit in what happened, and as much as anything because he's morally weak rather than being a bad person, if you like. He's been pushed around, and you know, he's sort of human. And you know, I met my lovely agent knew someone in the oil business, and she introduced me to him. And he was such a great guy, and he was so educated and thoughtful about the issues of environmentalism. And then he introduced me to a guy who worked on the rigs and was what's called a wellhead engineer, the person who stands at the top of the well and does all the technical stuff, who was a very feisty, foul-tempered, swearing Scottish fella who didn't have much time for me for ages, but ultimately gave me the secrets to how to actually blow the damn thing up in the end, bless him, over a couple of pints. and told me the story, which is the central part of the plot that, some people have kind of gone aha about, some people have gone, what the hell happened there? It's a bit technical. So
that's brilliant.
Anyway.
Gosh, fantastic research, with primary sources, so important. So here's a tough question for you then, especially considering the context of this talk this evening. Do the arts have a part to play in the climate crisis, or are we just kidding ourselves? Is it just something that makes us feel better?
Yeah, I mean, this is my kind of academic research direction. Actually, I'm very interested in environmental communications, which is it's a whole big field of study in the communications field in academia, and this is one of the big questions. And Amitav Ghosh very famously talked about people in the future will look back at our artists and think this was a time of the great derangement, because why aren't all artists talking about it, and blah, blah, blah. Of course, we're, increasingly we are. I mean, for sure, since I think that was 2015, 16, something like that, when his book came out. Now we're talking about it. The question is, so what? Isn't it? And Kate Rigby in a paper, she talks about, what does she say? She talks about whether it's all just idle chatter. Theodor Adorno, the philosopher, talks about this. After the Second World War, there can be no poetry after Auschwitz. That kind of meme, if you like. As artists, are we all engaging in idle chatter? Or are we aiming all our work at the usual suspects, the same people, writing and reading it in a circle? Or Kate Rigby, what does she say? Or can we be eco-prophetic witnesses? So rather it's rather grand. I'm trying to, put two words together on a page most of the time. But, are we prophesying the future? I mean, I'm hoping that, I put this what if scenario in, what if you Canadians stop your moratorium on drilling? This might happen, I mean, it's got a kind of end game there, this story. It's got potentially, a tale to tell of what if. So it has that prophetic witness kind of quality, potentially. I think in the end, I mean, for me, you've just got to keep shouting. You've just got to keep shouting and shouting and shouting, and hopefully a few more people will hear. I read this piece, but it's quite a funny piece of academic research, actually. This guy, he goes and he gives a climate novel to 50 people, and he gets them all to read it. And then as soon as they've read it, he interviews them. And he says, so, are you going to be engaging in more pro-environmental behavior in the coming days? And they all kind of said, God, yeah, sure am. Yeah, God, it's just terrible, isn't it? It's appalling what's going on, unbearable. And then he gets back in touch with them in a month's time and he says, so what pro-environmental behavior have you undertaken in the past month? And I mean, you know what the answer is, right? So it's a difficult one. It's a difficult one. I think as artists, we have to revise and review our own activities as a starter for 10. And Helen was talking about the personal, the eco-personal. I mean, that's your starter for 10. Of course, as an artist, what are you actually doing? And then, maybe you can start thinking about where what you write is going, who it is you're trying to speak to, where you're trying to speak to. I'm doing this project called Creative Climates at the moment, where I link up local artists and local science research environmental projects. And I get the artists to make new art based on the local environmental research. And then we look at where we're going to put that art, whether we can aim at new audiences to listen to that art. Because the one thing we do know is that from environmental studies is that if you go in and you say by the end of the century it's going to be 6 centigrade hot air and we're all going to die, we're going to die, your children are going to die, everyone goes, oh God, yeah, God, it's so terrible, and they despair. But then despair very often leads to apathy, and then apathy leads to denialism and rejection of that idea. Whereas if you go in saying, hey, look, here's somebody who lives just around the corner from you, who's doing this, who's saving some frogs, you know?
Yeah.
So here's some local people doing stuff already in your area, and then you can lead up to the 6 degrees centigrade and maybe we're all going to die and blah blah. But you've already corralled people with something meaningful and hopeful.
Yeah.
So I do think as an artist, it's worth thinking in that, a little bit in those terms. How are you coming at this? What are you trying to do? What are you trying to do with this art? What's your purpose? I mean, purpose is a difficult one also, because half the time you're just trying to make art, aren't you?
Yeah,
shout, I don't know, shout loud.
Absolutely. Well, I think, ecofiction is part of the wider project of fiction and of the arts in general, to basically kind of like widen the kind of ontological imaginary, you could say, certainly increase empathy, which we need more in this world than ever. Encourage people to walk in other people's shoes or moccasins, for 2 moons or more, and imagine other ways of being in the world. Hell, we need that in the world more than ever, and every piece of art can help towards that bigger endeavor, and the two can intersect as well. I'm thinking of the novel by Tim Winton, Juice, which is extraordinary, where it's set in a very bleak scenario, this sort of burnt Australia, but basically the core of the novel is about human decency and about what remains of us when the lights go out, and basically it's a kind of cri de coeur for common human decency, which I thought was a very empowering and kind of uplifting message to come out of a very bleak novel. So you can do both, really. You don't just have to tell people to go and hug trees or lie in front of bulldozers. Just like be decent people, have empathy for other ways of being in the world.
And I think you can surprise and invoke surprising emotions and surprising thoughts in people as well. It's just accessing those different audiences and so on. We were looking at, there's this brilliant artist who creates these sort of giant willow and wood figures in the National Forest just north of Leicester, and they kind of peering around trees and so on. But what we were thinking was, let's bring one of those figures and let's put it in an area of terrace streets and run down ex-factories in northeast Leicester and have it peering round a busted arsehole factory, with some background sounds of forest and things like that, and kind of disrupt. There you go. Sorry, I had to use that word once, didn't I? Disrupt a bit, undo, shift a consciousness somehow with what it is that you're doing.
Yeah, I think that's the best we can aspire to as artists, really. So who or what inspires you as a writer then?
I mean, everything. I mean, history and place, for sure. Histories and places, always. I mean, history particularly, but history and landscape. And landscape can be an imaginary, I haven't been to the high Arctic, but we all know everything. We've all seen everything now, haven't we? I know I may not have physically been there and embodied it fully viscerally, but we see things, we know things, and we can imagine things. And so landscape does a lot of it. And history, and my background's in anthropology. I've got degrees in anthropology, and the anthropological knowledge, indigenous knowledge as well, if you like. They've imbued my first 2 novels. They're going to imbue my next novel, and I think that you know, those three things.
Yeah,
fundamentally
brilliant.
where I find everything that comes creatively.
Fantastic, thank you. So you mentioned about this third book then. So is that going to be an eco-fiction?
Well, it is actually, yeah, and I don't know if I'd kill it by talking about it, but no, I don't, because I'm up and running with it enough. It's set in the Himalayas, so I've gone British Columbia, I've gone the Arctic, now I'm going the Himalayas, and it's about a film crew who go to the Himalayas to make a tire advert in this pristine wilderness, and the mountain guide who decides, no, you're not, that he's gonna undo the whole thing and take
a
the
bit of
whole
ecotage.
thing. Yeah, oh yes, ecotage is very much the thing. And actually, I'm going. I'm showing off here. I'm going to Ladakh in June for a month to be an artist in residence at the Ladakh Arts Organisation.
Nice.
I know. It's kind of slightly wild, but to do the research. But I was there 20 plus years ago. I used to be a location manager in the film business, and which is where all this comes from, of course. And I had to location scout a commercial in Ladakh all through this, the high Himalayas and so on. It was the most incredible undertaking for the most outrageously, madly banal of reasons. And as you can imagine, it absolutely blew my mind. 90% of the work I did were kind of, kitchen diners in South London for Purser lads, things like that. Suddenly I was at 18,000 feet in the Himalayas. So it always stuck with me, and that's going to be my next book.
Oh, I can't wait. But it's fantastic to hear about the residency, and you've obviously earned that and you deserve it. But it's something that any of our students could work towards as well. I've done a couple of these residencies as well, and it's a great opportunity to do a deep dive into your project, in an inspiring location. But it'd be great to hear something from the novel now to give people a taste of this novel. I know it's not coming out until September, but can you give us a sneak preview?
Yeah, sure thing. Yeah, it'd be my absolute pleasure. And it's very interesting actually picking out 10 minutes to read. Today I found myself, my poor publisher who's about to send the book to hard copy print is going to find a load of last minute amendments after what I was finding today. So okay, I'm going to read a piece from the second half. I thought I'd go for drama, because drama is always more interesting. So Carrie Essler, my Coast Guard, after the oil rig explodes, she's missing, presumed dead in the polar wilderness, but she's actually the only person who can find out the truth of what happened. And now she's trying to escape this wilderness and head back to civilization. She's heading south out of the far north, and it's winter, so it's dark as well. And she's done the one thing, which is suicide, which she shouldn't have, and that's she's wandered off the shore ice and out onto the sea ice without even realizing it. She's no idea how far out onto the ocean she is. Yeah, and the only other thing I should say is a lead is, probably most of you know this already, but a lead is when the pack ice opens up and there's a water kind of a watery opening in the ice. It's called a lead. That's kind of crucial to what I'm going to read. Okay, all right, get on with it, Whitehead. Harry shrugged on her sled harness, picked up her walking poles, hopped up and down a couple of times. Her problem, her most immediate problem, it was 10 a.m., but only a dim miasma of light filtered through the gunmetal cloud, and the light made of the icescape a blank, two-dimensional canvas, so undifferentiated that she could discern nothing at all. Her feet seemed to float in a pale, ashen fog. It was as good as a whiteout. Call it a grey out. When she had been taking down the tent, packing the sled, her possessions' solid lines were points of focus. She hadn't noticed the absolute blank of what lay ahead. At each step she could be putting her foot into a bank of snow or a lead covered only in mush ice. She was as good as blind. She pondered for a few moments, and then she took a spare pair of red overgloves from the sled. She peered at her wavering compass, then threw one of the gloves several yards ahead. She set off towards it, trying and failing to make a Hansel and Gretel gag out of her predicament. The sled slipped along nicely, at least. She had poured liquid water across the raised sections of its base, let the water freeze solid, rubbed it smooth. After a few yards, she threw the other glove on beyond the first. But then she tripped over something, only just keeping her feet by digging in her walking poles. She took out her torch, switched it on, a chunk of ice rubble the size and shape of a toaster. In the torchlight, she could make out lots of others scattered across the striated surface. "Going to be a long day," she said. The torchlight veered around as she clutched it in one hand along with a walking pole. Every few yards she had to stoop and throw a glove, checking the uncertain compass each time. There was no wind. After all these weeks of it hissing across the ice out of the north, the complete silence made this shadow world yet more uncanny. The ocean, so close beneath the ice, felt like a hidden predator, Godzilla huge. Bastian had told her how in the far north of the polar ocean lay the abyssal depths, in places near 18,000 feet deep. She kept wanting to swing round and shine the torch behind her, catch whatever pale creeper lurked, waiting to pounce. When she did turn to look back, her breath formed a frost trail behind her, hanging weirdly static in the air at head height. "Fear'll kill you soon as bears," she said aloud, trying for a jaunty tone. But the silence seemed to prick up its ears, as though suddenly alerted to her presence. And then, abruptly, a breeze started up. It blew right in her face, several degrees warmer, a wind from the south. She stopped, just allowing it to play across the bare skin of her face, the faint sensation not of warmth, but of, well, less cold. "I'll blow the bloody clouds away, Will." She was silenced by the sound of a gunshot. But then three more of differing tones, followed by a weird twanging, like the thickest steel cables in the world, pulled taut and played by giants. The surface beneath her shivered. Still, she could make out nothing at all through the grey out, but she heard growling, muted, agonized screeches. Her heart quickened. The ice must be moving with the temperature change. She walked on, picking and throwing her gloves more quickly and further each time, not checking the compass now. And then a ridge of ice rose before her. Its massive series of interlocked, flat-sided ice fragments, 20 feet high, formed a disorderly miniature mountain range. Raftering ice, she realized, two flows crashing into one another, forcing each other into the air, like time-lapse tectonic plate geology. The ridge stretched away in either direction as far as her torchlight could reach. What did it mean? The wind picked up. More thunderous reports, crackling grumbles, a noise like a shell beach sliding in a tide. She could see nothing. No obvious route over the ridge revealed itself. So she turned left, east, toward the shore, she guessed. The compass veered all over the place. It would begin to settle, then swing off just with the movement of her breath. Still, it was just a little brighter now. She took a thermos from her sled, drank a few gulps of water, helped herself to the penultimate square of chocolate, sucked its frozen sweetness until she felt calmer. The torch began to turn yellow and then orange. Almost she hurled it at the ice ridge beside her. She thought about stamping it into 1,000 tiny parts, grinding the bulb glass into dust. Instead, she plodded forward, following the dim orange beam. Anger beat fear every time, though anger was just about as useless in this frosted hell. But it felt warmer, not just warmer, a lot warmer, maybe 15 degrees warmer. Her infuriatingly uncomfortable survival suit suddenly felt like a sweatbox. She heard a cannon go off ahead, more like warship artillery, and immediately after there came an odd, deep, sibilant growl and accompanying gurgle, like the digestive system of some gargantuan beast. She shone the torch forward through the lightening grey. As the sound grew louder, whatever it was coming her way. And just as her mind understood what it must be, a black line in the surface came slicing towards her, faster than she could run. The whole ice floe was splitting apart. Slipping, skidding on the ice, driving her poles in, hauling at the resistant sled, she threw herself to the left. The crack came rushing past. Water frothed and splashed. Fog boiled from the crack as if it were filled with lava. She lost her footing, fell, twisted in her sled harness. Frantically, she struggled to her feet, dragged the harness over her head. The torch dropped to the ground. All around her came the booms and cracks of shattering ice. And then the reality of her situation struck her. She was the wrong side of the lead, on the north side. And with that thought, oddly enough, her panic left her. She had no time left, no food left. She must make progress. She lifted the harness, hauled the sled round back toward the smoking black water, snatched up the torch. The crack was 4 feet wide already, too wide. She shook her head at her own folly, even as she ran toward the lead and leapt. But her foot slipped at its edge. She toppled forward, had time to reach out just as her torso crashed into the far side. The torch skittered away to hit the base of the ice ridge she'd been following. It lay there, a little pool of light, as Carrie's legs dropped into the water. Fingers clawing the ice, her elbows digging into the surface, she tried to keep herself from sliding back. The fog swirled about her. She felt the harness slide down from her waist to her thighs, heard the sled creaking on the lead's far lip. It was going in, and she was going with it.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Harry. I've had the pleasure and privilege of reading the whole novel, and it's certainly gripping, edge of the seat stuff. And a couple of things that came to me. Your novel is in a way a novel of two halves. You've got this sort of macrocosmic, sort of maximalist first half where you're talking about, in a way the world is, especially in terms of the oil industry, and you do that with such gumption, and do it absolutely so well. But then the second half is a novel of survival, and everything kind of like dwindles down to this very, very narrow focus. And like everything is stripped away. I mean, it reminds me of the myth of the descent of Inanna in many ways, the way that everything's stripped away from Carrie, and she continually rises to the challenge. The less she has, the more she steps forward and shines in this bleakly beautiful environment. And talk about shifting baseline syndrome. She's continually experiencing it there, very literally, on this kind of ice shelf that's breaking up and so on and so forth. And every kind of like place of safety, like Hilary Mantel's idea of a place of greater safety, is ripped away from her. So it's exhausting in a way. By the end of it, I was kind of exhausted, but it's an amazingly gripping novel. But I think that second half of survival lifts it into something quite existential, I think, and metaphysical almost. Like it's been very beautiful, and it goes into some interesting territories, very liminal spaces by the end of it all, which, as I said in my review, it's kind of quite anthropological in a way that you're talking about the shadows and ghosts and so on. But I don't want to give too much away. But it's very much a novel of mimetic realism. But you know, there is some interesting other stuff going on there, which I think takes it, you know, to the next level for me.
Yeah, I mean, you know, there's a dead man who has a tendency to mansplain to
Yes.
poor Carrie, you know, all the way through her trials and tribulations. And he may be real or he may not be real, and he may be human or he may be animal.
It's like almost like a doppelganger or something.
Yeah, and it's funny, you know, because you know what it's like. You write a full-length novel. I mean, it engages your mind for years, and this one certainly did. But it also is just what it is, and you emerge out the back end of it, kind of thinking, but you know, now I know what it is. But when you're writing it, you have to write it to learn why you're writing it. Write the story to learn what the story is, as it were. And it did. I think you put that really well. You know, it starts as this huge, great. It's actually called a drill ship. It's a ship that's an oil rig, and you know, they're much bigger than aircraft carriers. They're the most incredible things, and this thing blows up, and it's huge and it's massive, and yeah, it goes back and back and back and back, and you know, and in the end, Carrie, she hasn't even got ice. She's walking on mush. You know, she's in the end, she ends with walking on water, if you like. So just her and nothing else, and it was kind of about that, because she's a cynic, and she doesn't care, and she possibly doesn't care much more, you know, in the end. But it's only when it's really, really awful and terrifying beyond belief that she looks around and she goes, "Wow, look at this place." Look at this place. And when she's covered in the oil under the ice, you know, it breaks up and there's all the oil slick and stuff lurking there beneath this beautiful ice, you know, and she's covered in the oil. And it's at that moment she goes, "Wow, this place. And
she finally has that eco epiphany.
She does, and I guess it's kind of, you know, that's it, you know. I mean, I think I'm a bit like that, you know. I'm a failed eco warrior entirely, you know, living out my bourgeois bloody life, and failing with so many things and so many attempts to be ecologically aware and behave right, and then I fail too, and then I'm good, and then I'm bad, and all the rest of it. So I guess it's a little bit about that, you know, which is why everyone's so morally compromised in the book. I mean, we all write about ourselves in the end, narcissistic writers. But you know, maybe that's the point for Carrie, is that it takes it all being stripped back until it could not be more brutal and immediate.
Yeah. The other thing I was going to flag up was it would be a great audio book. Are there any plans for it to be narrated?
Well, yeah, WF House are publishing it as an audio book. Actually, I don't know yet who's doing the reading, which I'm quite excited by to find
fantastic.
out.
Do you have any preferences? In the ideal world, who would narrate your novel?
Oh God, I mean, I don't know, you know, because it's Carrie. Carrie's the central protagonist. Ross is the secondary protagonist. So I kind of feel like it should be read by a woman. And I mean, I always had Emily Blunt in mind for Carrie.
I'll give her a call, see if she's up for it.
You give her a call, yeah, sure. But I don't know. I mean, I've never thought about who could read it. I'm just fascinated by the idea of it being read. And there's an American deal in the offing for an audio book too, so that would be interesting as well to hear. Wow. You know, Carrie's Scottish, so you know, I didn't attempt any Scottish accent or anything like
wise, that. But if it was made into a movie, who would you want to direct it?
Who'd I want to direct it? Well, Tony Scott's passed on.
Yeah.
I guess, because it is a disaster narrative. in the end, you know. So it kind of it's a action driven piece. It is, although it travels off into this sort of strange, dark existential space that, you know, in part was influenced by the film Atanajuat. I don't know if anyone's come across that film. It's a brilliant film, all set on the pack ice. With entirely, although it was directed by a German guy, it's entirely acted by indigenous people from that region where he filmed
It's fantastic. I can see that, but I just thought Werner Herzog.
Yeah, well, yes,
he does that kind of extremist thing very, very well, doesn't he?
Yeah. Herzog would be, well, you know, give him a ring on my behalf,
okay,
please.
all right. Well, any questions from our guests here in the chat? Anybody wants to ask Harry a question? Pick his brains now. Yeah, Mo.
Sorry, me again. Thank you for that reading. That was brilliant. In terms of research, sounds like you've written 2 books and you're working on a third. How different has the research that you've done been for you for each book, and how organized are you with it? Do you have an idea in mind of the end of the book before you start out researching, or does the research have to unfurl as the writing unfurls?
I mean, that's a really good question, and I've written. I mean, I've written 4 books. I've got a third book with my agent at the moment that's set in 1905, and it's about the oil business in the Caucasus during the time of the first proto-Russian revolution. It's about a young Joseph Stalin. So that was a lot of research too. I mean, my next one just should be about some boring academic who lives in the Midlands. But to answer your question, all the books I've written have taken a lot of research, and in part have been born of the research. But they're, I mean, of course, and I know it's something of a trope that writers have, there comes a point where you have to stop. And I mean, I did that. I really had a problem with that in my first book, which I spent 15 years researching my first book. It was all about this real guy who was a First Nations man who was tried for cannibalism in 1900. And it turned out his father was white and his mother was indigenous, and it was a complex story. Anyway, the research completely dominated me for ages. And it was only after many years I was talking to this psychiatrist, I was going half mad, and I mentioned the trial for cannibalism, and he said, "There's your story, Harry." Because I'd been just researching this guy's whole life, and it had been a biography, it had been a theatre play, it had been a film. Oh God. So I made all kinds of mistakes with that first book. And I finally just stopped. And it was my wife did it. She says, "You've got to throw it all away and just sit there. And I sulked for a fortnight with an empty piece of paper. And then I actually started writing. So I've been a bit better this time round. Like once I had Carrie and once I had the oil rig, you know, I started writing formative stuff. And actually, funnily enough, the book about Stalin was going to be some backstory. It was going to the first iteration of this novel is going to be these warring families, Russian and American families, and all trying to drill in the Arctic now. And this was going to be a chapter, and it ended up being this just big book that I wrote on the side about Stalin and Russian oil. But so it's funny how things come alive, and I had to take that out entirely and reject it. All of that backstory, all of that stuff, but I had to kind of write it creatively before I could reject it. So what I know now, and going into this next book of mine, is I'm much more focused on formative writing, formative creative writing from early stages, and catching hold of your characters and their inner conflicts. You know, you don't, Cormac McCarthy said, you don't know a character until you know what they want. I love that line. Yeah, what do my characters want? What do they need? Sure. But that can come about by formative writing. And I think if you get beyond the idea that all this creative writing you're laying down might go nowhere, and stop caring about that, stop being precious about it, then the two can kind of flow together and you throw loads of stuff away. But there again, this is just me. This is how I write. And, you know, the first novel was overblown research. The second novel was loads of research, but with me writing. And this next novel is much more led by the creative writing, although it's turning out I need to know lots of stuff about glaciers and the Himalayas and all kinds of stuff. But that's feeding into the story that's there. So on balance, I'd go story. I'd always go story and let it feed. But then sometimes, you know, you get into a subject, right? Like I wrote a book about Himalayan art 25 years ago with this art dealer guy I knew, and it never got published. It's a long story, everyone fighting each other. But there, you know, I got to know all about Himalayan art. And now that's totally feeding into this story. You know, it's feeding in because I learned about it 25, 30 years ago. So, yeah. That's a long answer.
Thank you.
Okay.
Brilliant. Any other questions for Harry before we have to let him go? I'm sure you could ping him a question as well. Is that okay, Harry?
Yeah, of course.
Fantastic. We got a lovely question from Megan Ashfield. Go ahead, Megan.
Hiya. I was just wondering, in regards to writing like multiple books, what were the points where you felt like you lost motivation in terms of actually getting the writing started, and how were you able to find that again?
Yeah. Oh, God. I mean, that's such a key question. And you know, I sold my first novel, which had taken 15 years of kind of research and writing, and I got an academic job. And I was the first creative writing lecturer at the university, and alongside my colleague Jonathan Taylor, we had to build the subject up from scratch. And I lost a decade in my creative writing, and I wrote this good idea novel, but you know, directed at my academic colleagues, and my second book set was really overwritten, and it kind of went nowhere. I had to get it was called Nowhere, funnily enough, and it went nowhere. And then what happens is you lose motivation by lack of continuity. And I think long form fiction, there's this period, and this is for me because everyone writes differently, but for me, you've got to get up and running by inhabiting the world. And that takes, I don't know, 30,000 words, whatever, however many it is. And then beyond the 30,000, because I think often novels have, a novel idea has 20, 30,000 words in it. And you go, hey, wee! And then what's my plot? What's the deeper part of the story? What's the conflict? And then your motivation dies because you haven't gone back deep enough. But for me, what's always killed off my motivation is stopping and starting. If I stop and I start and I stop and I start, and an academic job does that to you if you don't watch it. But you know, if you write your 10,000 to 15,000 words of a novel and then you put it aside for 6 months, it's really hard, I think, to keep it going. So for me, there's a continuity required initially. There comes a point when it's just there, but you write and you write and you write, and then somehow the world you're imagining is really at times visually superimposed over the normal world. So you can half see the Arctic tundra or whatever the hell it is, or the oil rig burning, you know, in your life. And once you get to that point where it's there, it's kind of shimmering, the world of the novel that was just a blank page and is now not just some words, but a world and people and all the rest, then I think it'll stay with you. Even if you go away from it for 5 years, you know, it'll stay. But you've got to get to the point of the shimmer. Maybe that's the way. Does that make sense? Does that kind of sound real to you?
I think so. Yeah, I think that's really helpful. Thank you.
Great question, Megan. Thank you so much. So I think we need to let Harry go now, in all fairness, although I love to let him talk, you know, until the end of the evening.
Yeah, I love this.
It's great shooting the breeze with you, Harry.
Yeah,
Is it okay to
always.
share your academic email here with
Yeah,
people?
please do. Yeah,
Great.
do
Here
drop
it
me a
goes.
line, anyone. Please do. Any questions or anything like that. Happy to chat.
Well, thank you so much. It's been fascinating hearing about your process, your ideas. A pleasure as always to talk with you, Harry. So take care. See you soon, hopefully.
Thanks, Kevan. Thanks so much, mate. Cheers.
Bye.
Take care all. Bye-bye.
Okay, people. So let's have another 5-minute break, and then let's reconvene for the third of our evening, the Earth Bards showcase. So see you in 5. Okay. Hello, welcome back, everybody. How are you doing? So, in our third of this Writing the Earth events, we'll be giving over the floor to new emerging voices, some from our programs here at Arts University Bournemouth. I think most of you actually are students here, but others may watch this recording later on. But we have students here from the BA in Creative Writing and the MA in Creative Writing, so it's lovely to see you all. And I'm hoping that we'll hear some of you this evening. The names I had down for the Earth Bards showcase so far include Jamie Kershaw, Kit Couch, Louisa, Anna Sophia, and Megan. And also Mo initially had put her name down, but obviously she's got a poorly voice. But I do have your piece here, Mo. So if you would like, I'll be happy to read it out for you on your behalf, or you could get somebody else to do it for you.
Thank you. It's since been edited. I think I can do it.
Oh, even better. Nobody wants to hear me waffle on. So do you want to go ahead?
It'll just sound like I'm a man. Okay, I'll start. It's a, what is it? It's not exactly an eco piece. It's a poem about Cornwall and cliff walks and tourism and motherhood and childhood and nature and vertigo. It's called High Life. Down the craggy, buffeted track, shock of gorse, a buttery froth, mud underfoot, sun on our backs, first smile of the sea, compass due south. Moss to march on, thick underfoot. This is the walk we planned all week. Granite and fossil and dried moss root. This is the path all the walkers take. And it's picture perfect. But we picked a day with a wind speed of 36 mph. And it's on shore, but still I can't quite say that I'm loving the way it steals my breath, makes me hover and clutch, avoid looking down, halt in my tracks, grab what I can, and hook-kneed, head back up the lane to the inland track where we parked the van. I cannot compare my vertigo stare with the 8-year-old self who opened her mouth and took in great gulps of lizard air, perched on the edge of a cliff or a gulf. A mountain goat, my mother said, handfuls of sea spinach stuffed in pockets, knowing which handholds and footholds to tread, head in a hanky, waist-tied jacket. We roamed the whole coastline, safety a back thought, proud of our bloodline, dots on the skyline. Lure of Easter egg back at the house, head-nodding daffodils placed in a vase, tea for the hikers who scaled the heights, a Cadbury prize even if you came last. But midlife me now holds the coats, is content with a cushion of salt marsh and moss, to watch out for seals, while the next phase of goat marches right to the edge, wind-whipped, voice lost. This is my Cornwall, the one I accept, the place where my father still roams the cliffs, skips over stiles, scrambles up granite, first to spot gannets and choughs and swifts, and I may not be his cliff-climbing girl, but such is the strength of our family tree. If I write down the feelings of sun in a gale, that's more than enough for him and for me. Thank you.
Bravo, Mo, that was great. It's so good to hear you read that out. Yeah, it's a brilliant piece. Has that been written recently?
I read it on just after a vertiginous cliff walk with my dad, who's 84. He had to hold my hand. And I was with my husband, who was trying to talk me down. But really what I only want is just to talk about anything other than heights. But it's a shame because I used to scramble up them when I was tiny without a backward glance.
So what, during this course did you write that? Like,
yeah, about 6 weeks ago, maybe. Okay. Well, just when the gorse was coming out, so maybe 4 weeks ago.
Lovely.
To a place that we go to quite a lot.
Yeah, it's a great poem.
Those paths are quite well trodden by tourists, and it's a bone of contention with my dad. He likes to go on the walks and look for birds, but he hates bumping into other walkers.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much for that. And I think you should consider that for the anthology, but it will be the group's decision about what goes into that course anthology. But I think that's a very publishable poem. Maybe submit it to Panorama or to another journal or competition even.
Well, thank you. That's great.
Okay, so Jamie Kershaw was next on the list, but I'm not sure if he's here. If you are, speak up or forever hold your peace. I can't see him at the moment, Jamie Kershaw. No. So we'll go down to Kate Couch. Would you like to go next, Kate?
Yep, can do. So I've got, again, probably more nature than necessarily eco-poetry. I've got a series of seasonal poems from the perspective of being a farmer. I'm a farmer's wife myself, so we have a small farm and sort of manage all sorts of things. So this is the Farmer's Harvest Song. The farmer's wife rises at dawn to feed the livestock, hay rich with the sleepy scent of clover and yarrow. In old stone walls, life crystallizes with lacy brilliance, verdant moss, pincushions threaded with trailing ferns. Blackberries, sharp as toothache, swell against snagging thorns. Across the field, the russet feather flare of a proud pheasant. Crickets thrum, thunder loud in blood-drop poppies. An adder curls under sheaves like an unspoken question. Farming is an ecological act, a cycle of sowing and reaping, of life and death, birth and harvest, spring and fall. Cut crops now perfectly dry in the heavy August heat. Men and machinery work hard to bring the crop in. The frantic gathering of grain against a forecast of rain. Clouds brew swiftly as the last load is brought home. Lightning scars the sky, magnesium through flame. Thunder throbs like a migraine, raindrops like fists. After the storm, the peace is punctuated by an adagio of birdsong in the gathering dusk, a lullaby for the farmer's hard-working team, too tired to mark the day, save living through it. Now, I've also got the winter song, the spring song, and the summer song, but that might be a bit too much for everyone.
Well, we've got plenty of time. It's up to you. Do you want to share maybe one more now and see how much time we have after everybody else has had a go?
Okay, I'm going to take them out of order and I'm going to do the summer song then. The Farmer's Summer Song. Lambs gambol and baby rabbits nibble on sunny days. Coltsfoot gives way to cowslips, then calving heralds May. Striated cerise shades of early orchid rise like spears. Tall foxgloves plume and hedgerows are frilly with bloom. The intoxicating smell of bluebells and meadowsweet. Shearing season has begun and sheep are getting naked. Crop tending is in full swing, and the otherworldly song of the nightingale can be heard across the valley. Farmers' wives pick elderflower blossom heads for cordial. Greater stitchwork glows like scattered stars on field edges. Horse chestnut flowers grow thick as church candles. Livestock is washed and prepared for summer shows. Wild rose briars stitch the hedgerows with fragrant petals. Dragonflies flit in the shadows, while drifts of cow parsley foam on the road edge, and tractors trundle sedately by, on target for the haymaking season of midsummer. July sees sapphire cornflowers and bright poppies in crop fields. Cereal ears shine gold under an endless parade of sunny skies. The lambs will be ready to leave home soon, and a wave of joy sweeps through the countryside with each passing month.
Oh, lovely. Bravo. Thank you. So well observed. You can tell that, you work on the land, you live on the land, you know the land. It's interesting that, you have this connection with the farm, because one of our guest speakers on the writing in the Anthropocene unit, which I've developed, is Nicola Chester, who is a farmer's wife, and she's a brilliant nature writer. So you'll get to hear me in conversation with her soon. And it clearly shows, when you have that deep connection with the land. Like John Clare, the so-called peasant poet who came from my home county of Northamptonshire, he, and like many of the Romantic poets, knew the land intimately because he worked on the land as a labourer. You know, he didn't just ride across it on his high horse, but lived and worked on the land. So that shows in his writing, his attention to detail. And so, yeah, that was coming through in your writing as well. You might want to look at Claire's sequence called the Midsummer Cushion, which is like kind of a seasonal sort of cycle. The Shepherd's Calendar is another one of his that goes through the kind of agricultural year, and it has loads of wonderful eclectical words in local dialect words for things, bugs, birds and beasties, plants, and stuff that isn't around anymore. Talking about shifting baseline syndrome earlier, you know, the biodiversity of 200 years ago is incredible compared to what we have now. Sadly, you know, even within a lifetime, we lost so many species, which is heartbreaking. Think about it, but there's still a lot of richness there in the land, and I love this time of year so much. And like, it's great to hear about summer, to have a sneak preview of summer, of what we've got to look forward to. So thank you so much for sharing. So next up, let's have Louisa. Louisa, are you there? Go ahead.
Hi, good evening. Okay, so this year's theme for Earth Day, Our Planet, Our Power, reminded me of the 1990s television cartoon Captain Planet. And for those that don't know it, the basic premise is Earth's force, Gaia, gives 5 elemental rings symbolizing earth, fire, wind, water, and heart to 5 teenagers, aka the Planeteers. And they're spread across the globe, and they can, at will, combine their respective powers to summon the eco-superhero Captain Planet to fight pollution, corporate greed, and villains hell-bent on societal destruction. It has been eye-opening to revisit and to learn that a Planeteer movement still exists, and that a new Captain Planet comic book, is due to be published tomorrow in honour of Earth Day. And this nostalgic exploration has meant I've been reflecting on such things as what it means to be a Xennial millennial, or of the generation associated with this transition from the analog age to the digital age during my formative years. And returning to Captain Planet, there's a double episode in the first season named Two Futures. It aired in 1991 when I would have been about 8 or 9, and is partly set in today, so 2025. And I want to highlight it because it's particularly striking, not only because of the parallels with what is occurring in terms of the polycrisis, but mostly because of the progressive message being communicated, something I struggle to find a current example of, thinking about what is created for and aimed at my children to watch now, and not to mention the threat of increased censorship, and prompting further reflection on commercialization, politicization of the environmental movement during the Reaganomic years, the era of deregulation and its effects, as well as the idea of performative activism, and taking stock of the seriousness of the situation now, as well as acknowledging the innovative solutions that we already understand and possess, but we just need to implement, and holding all of this and imagining a view of the path ahead, echoing Gramsci's pessimism of the intellect and optimism of the will. So, oh yeah, and Kathleen Ellis is an American poet, and she recently said, just as the personal is political, so too the environmental is personal. Its loss is our loss. And I think this message really complements the Earth Day theme for the year and the call for people power to support the big switch to renewable energy, which to me means we demand it of our leaders. So with that in mind, I'm going to read you Two Futures, Part 1. Level terrains, oceans raised, resort pod flotillas adorned with vinyl peacock feathers, deluxe crafts suspended above storm systems, a serene 360 panoramic view for the mere few who made sure they could afford it. Meanwhile, huddled behind the blinking eye of truth, we, the destitute, cluster like clouds of carrion flies picking at wounds, bundled and braced for the next wake of polymer rings and powerless limbs, the only ones to realise the criticality of blood and bone. Part 2. Entitlement annulled, the once disparate now a fusional whole. Benign olive wood lines drawn through the sands of time, solar, wind, and hydro energies combined, the people's feu de joie, rekindling hearts, pounding in unison for all critters, da-dum, da-dum, da-dum. Astounded by history, beholden to the revival, a dumbfounded disbelief, that we almost accepted that nothing could be done to regain our planet, to regain our power, us, the realised ones. Thank you.
Wow, fabulous. Thank you so much. Brilliant poem and brilliant critical introduction, actually. That was very impressive to contextualise your work like that. You don't have to be doing an MA Creative Writing, do you? But I think it's so important to introduce something properly and to give it the, the seriousness it deserves, as an endeavour, a contribution to the discourse. So thank you so much for a fantastic performance. So next up, let's have Anna Sophia.
Thanks. Can you hear me? Yeah. Okay. So this is a flash fiction piece I wrote in response to a call for submissions from Panorama on the theme of survival. And it was subsequently published, which is brilliant. So I'm going to read that out. It's called High Tide. I walked to Westminster Bridge, where the Houses of Parliament stretched high, imprinted on the evening sky. The moon pushed through faded pink and cream, the sun low on crimson horizon before the curtain fell on the day's play. The evening alarm sounded sharp and shrill. Time to go home for most of the city dwellers. Faceless men in black boiler suits stooped over hidden mechanisms, pushing, pulling, pressing against levers which activated the iron-walled bridge barriers that stopped the rising river flooding the streets. They reminded me of beavers fortifying their dam. Despite this, the waters rose rapidly, creeping across the bridge arch. I hurried my pace. The city was deserted now. I reached the footpath that edged its way across the bridge, hunched over churning water, lapping and licking at my Wellington boots. A lone wind breathed chill into my bones. Darkness fell quickly in these times, on the soul and on the day. The nights were long, despite the summer. I passed the only person left on the street, the newspaper seller packing his pale parchments, emblazoned with today's news, a stalwart of Westminster, a city satire, all-seeing, serving all. His tired eyes stared at me as I quickened my pace. When I was inside the tall, ornate gates of the government buildings, I headed into the hidden chamber. I was on night duty that week. I entered the temperature-controlled room. Suspended in the middle was a large, bulletproof glass box. A breeze flowed from vents at the sides of the box, forcing the young tree to undulate like a dancing girl at an Eastern bazaar. The last oak sapling, grown from a seed salvaged from decimated trees, shivered and sighed. Thank you.
Wow, bravo. Yeah, it's such a strong image, my goodness. Yeah, reminds me of that line from the Joni Mitchell song about, they put all the trees in the Trees Museum, paid $1.50 to go and see them. Yeah, fantastic. But a good piece to perform, actually. Sometimes there are short story slams and opportunities to perform this sort of short fiction in public. So big yellow taxi, of course. Yeah. Thanks, Vicky. So yeah, it'd be great to give that a bit more exposure. But I'm so glad it got into the Panorama Journal, and well done for that.
Thank you.
So before we hear from our next act, Megan, just to sow the seed, if anybody else wants to do something, there's still time. It'd be lovely to hear from anybody else who wants to share, who hasn't shared yet. I know we have some storytellers in the room, and other writers. Vicky, yeah, brilliant. Thank you. I'll put your name down, Vicky. If anybody else wants to have a go, just holler. But let's hear from Megan next. Antonio as well, brilliant. Thank you. Go ahead, Megan.
Hi. So this is it's sort of eco-poetry. Well, it is eco-poetry, but it's on more of a domestic scale than a global scale. It's about noise pollution, and it's basically whenever it was born from me. It was in lockdown actually. This I've since like done it up, but the initial concept was this moment in lockdown where I was really stressed and I just went into my garden just to get some air, because garden is the closest thing you've got to nature, and just the amount of noise just everywhere in the street, it is so hard to focus on the natural world because the world is just so busy all the time. Like the two brilliant talks were saying, it's like just trying to slow down and actually focus is really hard. So it's a bit of a performance poem more than a written one, but yeah, I'll give it a go now. Bass boosted grooves bomb blast the walls. TV stereo crackle falls like chestnut spikes, litters the floor beside staticky phone calls. Burnt-eared, I beeline for the door. Thud. Fingerprints are revealed by door glass gleam. Soften the sound or I'll burst my seams. The sun's too bright, I draw my knees up. I hear the cling of sunbeams. If only the warm breeze dissolved the pneumatic ear ringing in my blood. Boom, wha boom, ba boom, wha boom, ba. Thud. All I want is silence. The pneumatic drills down the street plunge fingers in earwax, stare at feet. Bass boost bugles on repeat through my windows, searing heat. I press my face into my hands. Motors screech and snarl and roar like a vicious wave crash shore. Blather rises from next door. Wind blows my hair in strands. Boom, ba boom, ba boom, ba boom, ba chick 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 chick. Lovely weather for it, eh? All I need is silence. My eyes follow an oozing fly, juicy splodge on blazing sky, shrilly whizzing high, low, high, low, high, its lurid body bright as steel. A bumblebee hums his way round, a kinder, sweeter, softer sound. Blackbird sings from a twig she's found, kinder, sweeter, softer sound. The chainsaw has them drowned. It's groaning, screaming, grinding, squeal, boom, 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 ba, boom, 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 ba. Lovely weather for it, eh? The substitute for silence. I hear myself shout and sigh and stand up with a piercing cry. Why can't it stop? Just once. Why? Why can't all the noises die? All this fury in my head, I can't hear what my head voice said. Fumbling through thought corpses for what to say, I somehow demand, head voice, why can't I listen instead? I brace myself for the reply, but there is only silence.
Wow, that was amazing. Brilliantly performed there, Megan. My goodness. I hope you don't mind me saying that. Megan is a level 4 student doing her first year of the BA in creative writing here at Arts University Bournemouth. My goodness, what talent. I think you can go far, Megan. You saw her here first, folks. Absolutely amazing. My goodness, and so confident and articulate, and eloquent. That's brilliant. Yeah, well, and what great poem, you know, a combination of a sound poem, an observation poem, really interesting mix of stuff going on there, social satire, fantastic. Get it out there, you know, enter slams with it, send it off to competitions and anthologies. You know, it needs to be seen and heard, that poem. Thank you so much. Okay, so next up, let's have Vicky.
Okay, so this is quite short. It's called Hobo, and I suppose it's a little bit about consumerism, but you can make of it what you will. So, as soon as born, the blankets swaddle, even, she supposed, where no blankets are. A lucky charm, a bracelet, a kiss. Oh, the kiss is welcome. And necessity deems the blankets. Then the duping starts, bestowed by others, but soon she covets too, that collection of tableware, that exquisite dress, and so it fills all her crevices, the empty ones, where no kisses reach. Now she relinquishes, becomes a hobo of sorts, isn't duped anymore by neon and false smiles, and kisses are given for free. That's it.
Fantastic, Vicky. Thank you so much. Brilliant. Love to see more of your work, hear more of your work. So it's good to give poetry voice, you know, return it to the breath. So fantastic. So we have Antonia next. Do you want to go next, Antonia?
Yep. Can you hear me okay? Fab. This was written, well, it was born out of basically just a long, boring motorway journey and a spotted, sad-looking tree in a field. So it's nature, but it's the resilience of nature. Old Major Oak, standing alone in a sea of green, blackened and gnarly with age, barely clinging to life itself, yet a stronghold for the lives of so many others, creatures and humans alike. What tales can be told? Lovers sat at its feet, falling out, making up, making promises, futures planned, returning years later with their children to play among its roots and to climb and swing from its boughs. Birds seek its protection, nest and raise their chicks. Old Major watches them fledge to return year after year in a never-ending cycle. An owl roosting in a hollow like a sentry keeps watch every night. Many hundreds of years have passed, too many for Old Major Oak to count. Age has taken its toll. One stubborn branch clings to life, a few leaves here and there flutter in the breeze. Couples come to mourn at his feet, sharing tales and memories, tracing their initials carved in his trunk. No longer does wind rustle his leaves, no more acorns for squirrels to pilfer away. But the mighty wise owl remains to keep his nightly vigil. But wait, look closely, among Major Oak's roots, an acorn has burst forth with life, a new sapling. The cycle continues. Thank you.
Brilliant. Thank you so much, Antonia. I love oak trees, so that's great. Yeah, a poem about oak tree is my kind of jam. So thank you so much for sharing that. I'd like to end with a brief discussion about, you know, this evening's talks, but does anyone else have something they wish to share in the Earth Bards showcase before we close for contributions? Anyone else? Don't worry if not. We've had a fantastic kind of array of spoken word. Oh, Kate, did you have something?
Only by mention, I've got a Kyrielle, I think they call it, type of poem. Just as I've only recently done it. It's kind of not brilliant, but it's a bit of fun.
Okay, let's finish with that then. Go ahead.
Okay. Oh, when I can find it, here we go. The Song of Salvation. All around us is climate change, too much heat and not enough rain, strange patterns in migrating birds. Lovers of nature, heed my words. Melting ice caps and rising seas, our cherished world is on its knees. Now we need to make the tide turn. Lovers of nature, heed my words. Butterfly numbers are falling and bumblebees are declining. All around us the heathland burns. Lovers of nature, hear my words. Wading curlews are all but gone. Other species have lost their homes. For salvation, all wildlife yearns. Lovers of nature, hear my words. Now is the time to make great change. How we achieve this taxes brains, but our sea of voices must be heard. We stand together, heed our words.
Bravo, a great kind of call to arms there to end with. Fantastic. So thank you, Kate. So and thank you to all the performers who performed this evening, Earth Bards all. But let's just finish, maybe not to the bitter end. We can finish a bit earlier, but like it'd be great just to hear your thoughts about any of the things discussed this evening by Helen, by Harry, by the poets you've heard right now, the writers. Anything that you would like to reflect upon about the theme of Earth Day this year? What did you call it, Louisa? Was it Our Planet, Our Power or something? Any thoughts on the evening's talks and performances? Do we want to chip in? Vicky, that ecofiction may put some potential audience off. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, that's the risk. But I think if you do it beautifully enough, it can seduce all kinds of audiences, you know. And I mean, like Harry's novel is a good example of that. It's a gripping thriller, full stop. It happens to be exploring environmental issues, but in a very off-piste way, you know. So it can be done. You can use fictional poetry as a kind of Trojan horse sometimes to kind of smuggle in some interesting, provocative ideas. Nancy, do you want to go ahead?
Yeah, actually, that was what I was going to bring up. This idea of how he was talking about it should be implicit and shouldn't be preachy, which is one of the reasons why I wanted to take this master's, is to learn how to sort of balance that and get that subtlety in there. And one of the things he said really made sense to me, where you don't, your character can't start out as being this major eco warrior unless, well, they're going to fail then. I mean, he didn't say that, but often that's what, then it goes quite down. But if you start out with someone cynical and who's seeing the world rather cynically, and then implicitly sort of get it in there without them becoming an eco warrior, but just sort of maybe they just switch to some appreciation of nature. I found that really inspiring that he said that, and it's giving me something to really reflect on with my own characters. So
that's great to hear. Yeah, I think adopting a kind of antithetical approach can be very effective. I think it's essential, especially in fiction, to offer cross-sectional perspectives, some widely and wildly divergent from your own. You know, give voice to the heretic, the critic, to the climate denier, to the doomist. You know, give voice to all those people rather than just the people that, you know, you might align yourself more closely to. And then you'll possibly tackle what Vicky was saying, you know, reach out to a wider audience. You know, we need to kind of engage the people that are engaged in this stuff. You know, we need to start from where they're at, not from where we're at, you know. So start with a character that's more relatable to them, perhaps. So yeah, I'm so glad you took that away from Harry's talk, Nancy. Anybody else? Any thoughts? Or any takeaways? Anything that has inspired you? Anything you can take away from this evening's talk or readings? Mo?
Yeah, I guess I always like hearing about process, and I was quite interested in hearing what Harry said about how you have to, it's not always about the research, you just have to put your character out there and start with them sometimes, which made me feel much happier, because I'm not a great plotter, and So it was quite reassuring to hear that you don't always have to have a beginning and a middle and an end. You can let the character drive you. So it was very useful. Thank you for bringing him in. It was a really useful. Both their talks were great, but I like hearing about process.
Yeah, thank you. That was encouraging, or a good reminder to me as well, because I'm embarking on a new novel, and it's so easy to get swamped by the research. I love the research, but it can be a real rabbit hole, or several rabbit holes, a whole warren of rabbit holes. But yeah, be led by the writing, what do you call formative creative writing. So an emergent process. He's written a great paper on nomadic emergence as a kind of methodology. So I recommend checking that out. You could Google Harry Whitehead nomadic emergence, something that he advocates in his pedagogy as well as in his creative writing. So any other thoughts about this evening's talks or performances? Any takeaways? There's been loads of great recommendations, like all the poets that Helen recommended. Kate, go ahead.
Just thinking about what Harry was saying about sort of plotting and keeping going and that sort of thing. Another lady who's a novelist I know quite well, she said to me one day that if you were potentially stuck somewhere, very often if you have got a plot, you have kind of roughly plotted it, or you know what's going to happen elsewhere, you can go and work on the bit elsewhere and then hope to come back to and work your way back. You don't have to stay linear, if you like.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, write that scene, you know, that comes to you in the middle of the night. I've done this, written down that chapter, and then